It is the mother of all talk shows, the Open University of the airwaves, the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees and where you are encouraged to speak back to the teacher, either on the poll or on the messaging systems that we have, or even better, by making your call. The numbers are 08081 965522 if you're in Britain or Ireland. You can phone entirely free of charge. If you're in the US or Canada, it's +1 844 944 3344. Many people have already begun ringing in because the subjects we're dealing with tonight could scarcely be of greater moment. As I said, a state of virtual war exists between Russia and the United Kingdom. Never in second place, the United Kingdom's hatred of everything Russian, everything in Moscow, everything in the Kremlin is now vividly on display. The British bombed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The British launched an attack on the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation yesterday. The British were involved in the attack on the civilian infrastructure of the Kerch Bridge leading between the mainland of Russia and the Crimea. How do we know all this? Because Russia had illegally hacked the private telephone of the briefly British Prime Minister Liz Truss. Liz Truss, we can say, did not have time for the spycraft class at the Foreign Office. We know that the British did it because she texted Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, 1 minute after the explosion of the Nord Stream pipelines with the heavily coded words, "It's done." She is more Austin Powers than James Bond, I'll give you that, but then she wasn't long in the job. This was 1 minute after the explosion and before anybody else in the world even knew that the explosion had taken place. The fact that the Russians could so easily hack the phone of the British Prime Minister is a remarkable thing, especially as they were using the Israeli-invented spyware Pegasus software, which is represented in court, if you want to take a legal action against them, by none other than Cherie Blair, KC, the wife of the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. Curiouser and curiouser. Israeli spyware enabled the Kremlin to listen in and read the messages of the British Prime Minister, and the British Prime Minister was so stupid she gave away British culpability of a top secret terrorist operation directly to the phone of the US Secretary of State and without the use of codes. She could have said, "It's raining in London," or "Is it raining in Washington?" or "Have you hanged your washing out to dry?" But no, she texted the words, "It's done." Well, it's done now, Liz. The Russians know that you did it. That you did it, moreover, not just against Russia, but against your own NATO allies, in Germany in particular, but also in Sweden and Denmark. Friendly allied countries had their infrastructure destroyed or their territorial sovereignty assailed by you, by your special boat service commanded from the Admiralty building in Whitehall in London. You placed the machinery that was able to be located by the American airplane that flew all the way from the USA and bombed the locators that your special boat service had placed there. It was an Anglo-American operation of some bravery and some skill. And there will be people in Whitehall buzzing that I'm calling them out right now for doing this. But I believe that just as a small cloud can be a harbinger of great storms to come. This action against the Nord Stream by the Anglo-American Axis is that small cloud, and it is a harbinger of great storms to come. And those storms will look like this. Increasingly, on the European mainland, the country, the people, and even now the governments of mainland Europe are tiring of the UK-US suicide mission that they have been forced to undertake. They will not forgive an attack costing billions and costing, even more importantly, potentially the lives of tens of thousands of people who will freeze to death in Europe in the coming months. They will not forget the way that the euro and the European economy has been sacrificed for the dollar and for the economy of the United States of America. They will not forget that American nuclear weapons, new nuclear weapons, have now been seeded on American bases throughout their territory, making them an instantaneous target in an intermediate range nuclear exchange of weapons, which may very well happen as a result of the Ukraine war. They will not forgive the interference in their political, economic, and sovereign internal affairs that Britain and the United States in particular have been responsible for. And so the great storm to which I refer is one in which Britain and the United States become increasingly isolated in public opinion first, and isolated formally, politically, and economically. Macron and Scholz are busily preparing a legal challenge against the United States' unfair economic practices, its false notions of capitalist competition. And that court action is about to begin. And that too is a sign of things to come. Europe, which was inching towards a Eurasian engagement in its future, has now become profoundly alienated from Britain and the United States. And that is not in the interests of the people of Britain or the people of the United States. It's going to happen slowly, but surely. And I have no doubt how it will end. It will end with a rapprochement between Russia and Germany and France, and by definition, the smaller fish that sail along in the wake of the Franco-German political and economic alliance. The isolation of Britain and the United States will leave it few friends in the world. The Five Eyes, yes, but those eyes are dimming. And as the Russian hack of Liz Truss's telephone makes clear, they're not the only people with eyes and with ears in at the top table of the powers. Now, poor Paul Pelosi got hammered the other night in San Francisco. I don't mean that he got blindly drunk, although he's fond of doing so. Only recently he was in court for driving with 4 times the allowable amount of alcohol in his blood. Nancy was in Washington, D.C., committing other crimes, but Paul Pelosi may very well have been back on the sauce the other night, but none of that would justify someone assaulting him with a hammer. What would be an entirely private affair, where Paul Pelosi was before he got hammered, and who he was with in the house when he got hammered, and how and why he got hammered, and whether the hammer was his first or his assailant's hammer, is of course purely between the San Francisco police and poor Paul Pelosi, except in this regard. The attempt has been made just in advance of the midterm election to make this a political electoral issue, to imply that the assailant, who may or may not also, as I say, have been in his underpants, oddly, as he lives in Berkeley, California. It's a long way to San Francisco. And don't forget Mark Twain's famous remark that the coldest winter he ever experienced was summer in San Francisco, so it's chilly there in your underpants. How the man got into the house is, of course, a matter now for the police. But to blame it on the Republican Party, to blame it on Donald Trump, to blame it on MAGA Americans, that a gay nudist swinger ended up battering Paul Pelosi over the head is a bit of a stretch, if you will forgive the pun. Now, I look forward to more information. Don't you? If I haven't caught your imagination by now, I'm unlikely ever to. But Elon Musk, the new owner of Twitter, and I hope better than the oligarchs that went before, was quick to link the article which claimed that Pelosi had been, prior to the incident, in a gay bar until 2 o'clock in the morning in San Francisco. Heaven knows there are plenty there to choose from. Now, as I say, I've no idea if that story is true, but Elon Musk is not a lightweight man to have circulated it. If it is true, then I regard it as an entirely private affair. And I presume that Nancy Pelosi is well aware of the predilections of Paul Pelosi. After all, she's been married to him since 1963. But whatever happened in San Francisco the other night, it is almost certain that it has nothing to do with Donald Trump, that it has nothing to do with the Republican Party, that it has nothing to do with the midterm elections, which are only now days away and which presage the beginning of the end of the lame duck presidency of Joseph Biden. Speaking of Elon Musk, on day one of Musk's ownership of Twitter, the entirely arbitrary cap on my followers at 440,000 would appear to have been lifted virtually at the instant that Musk entered the building, because thousands of people were quickly added to my list of followers. I was assailed by people telling me they were now seeing my tweets for the first time in many months, 8 months to be precise. 80% of my output on Twitter was deliberately suppressed by the oligarchs who owned Twitter prior to Elon Musk's takeover. He says he's going to have a content moderation panel, a council, he called it. I immediately applied for the job. After all, I'm a parliamentarian of some note, almost 30 years, 6 parliamentary terms. I'm an avid user of Twitter. I have hundreds of thousands of followers with tens, scores, maybe hundreds of millions of impressions on my tweets over a very long period, some 12, 13, maybe more years on Twitter. I think I'm ideal for the job, Elon. I'm a person of the left, of conservative cultural views. I'm a person who believes in freedom of speech. And I'm a person who believes that you need to reinstate Donald Trump because the injustice that he suffered in being struck from social media platforms whilst the most powerful elected politician in the world scarcely needs to be overstated. And when you add Twitter's own role in suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop story, which is going to become the biggest story of 2023. Write that down. Remember, you heard it here. It's going to be a story that will involve shady business dealings, not just by Hunter Biden, the crack cocaine addict, the sex addict, the man with a taste for very young girls addict, but the role of Joe Biden in Hunter Biden's life will be revealed if power changes hand next Thursday, a week on Thursday, in the midterm elections. And lastly, in 1966, England hosted the World Cup, and a very good job they made of it too. I recall it vividly and happily, leading, thanks to a Russian linesman, to an England victory, the only England victory ever in the history of the World Cup. I'll never forget the sunshine gleaming on Jules Rimet in the hand of the English golden boy Bobby Moore. But at the time that England was hosting the World Cup, British soldiers, English and Scottish, were literally murdering Yemenis on the streets of Aden. Nobody said then that England was not a fit and proper place to host a World Cup. Gay people in England were committing criminal offences at the time if they engaged in their love for each other. England had had, until then, 200 years of imperial conquest, including the preeminent role in the organization of international slavery at the time we hosted the World Cup. Not that long before, not even a century before, we had bombarded China to punish them for refusing permission for us to ship Indian heroin onto the streets of China. We bombarded them until they concluded an unequal treaty with us and gave us some of their territory and the usual concessions. Why do I mention all of this? Because I'm just wondering what Qatar did to deserve the wholesale talk of boycotting and rubbishing that they are currently suffering because they're hosting the World Cup. If you're a drinker who cannot go to a football match without alcohol in your hands, give this one a miss, boys, and watch the World Cup on television with all the cans of special brew you can sink. Because in Qatar, you're not allowed to drink alcohol in public. You can drink it in your hotel, many do. But you cannot take it to the game. You cannot swagger through the streets, getting drunk and throwing chairs at the supporters of other countries, because that's just not within the customs, never mind the laws of the Arabs of the Persian Gulf and Qatar in particular. If you are going to the World Cup with your gay lover, why not be discreet in deference to the cultural mores of the people whose country you're visiting, who are your hosts? Nobody's saying you can't have private sexual relations with each other. Just don't ram it down the throats of the people of Qatar, because they don't hold with that in Qatar. Respect the local people. Respect the local customs. Or don't go. Hold hands in front of a big screen on somewhere in your own country. You see where I'm getting here? I'm getting at the liberal hypocrites. The World Cup's been held in America, which has invaded and occupied 50 countries since the end of the Second World War. The World Cup has been held in all kinds of countries whose crimes are far, far greater than any crime ever committed by the people or the government of Qatar. Now, I have nothing to do with Qatar. They haven't sent me a single ticket for their World Cup tournament. I have zero relations with Qatar. But I never stay silent when somebody is being bullied in the way that Qatar is currently being bullied. I thought that Donald Trump put it well, but that Vladimir Putin put it better in his 3-hour statement in Valdai this week. Can you imagine? Joe Biden speaking live for 3 hours? He said this: the West are entitled to their beliefs that there are dozens of genders. They're entitled to their gay parades, but they shouldn't try to force them onto other people. What about that statement did Putin get wrong? Controversial, I know. I'm sure the switchboard is jammed already, but it's Scott Ritter coming up first. You don't want to miss that, I promise you.